These are videos with extremely deep meanings, part 1. So yeah, what do you get from this video? I feel like it's saying we are all servants who provide a service for somebody, but even the somebodies provide a service for someone. I honestly don't know, so let me know what you think about this in the comments. I'm extremely curious because I rewatched this video at least 10 times.
Duendes.
Ooh, okay.
Entity that could live in your house, lives in the woods and nature and Some of them are mischievous, some of them could also be good. Some people kind of make a deal with duendes. You give them offerings and shit like that, and in return they do stuff for you.
Like they help you?
And there's this video of a guy talking about how one of his cousins came to him and shit and said, yo, I have something for you.
It's a duende?
Do you want it? He's like, I want it, fuck it.
He doesn't even ask what is it, or it depends what it is?
He's like, it's a toy, tiene vida. And that ever since he got that, good stuff has been happening. He's been having a lot of luck.
Un troll, un duende. Sí, se llama Chayán. Tiene como 20 años o más. A mí me lo regaló un primo. Pero tiene vida, dice. Digo, dámelo. Me ha servido mucho, gracias a Dios, me ha dado mucha suerte. Porque un día falleció mi hermano y no tenía dinero, nada de dinero. Le digo, un cabrón, ayúdame. En lo que llegué a mi casa, llegaron 3 camionetas cerradas. Me junté como 6,000 baros. Ya cuando iba llegando, falleció mi hermano. Y ya le dije a mis sobrinas, aquí está, y hay dinero.
What the fuck? Yeah. I feel like there has to be some sort of catch to it, though. I feel like that's too good to be true, bro.
I mean, he did say, like, it's been bringing him a lot of luck. And there's a lot of places in Mexico as well that you could buy, like, statues of them.
Nah, yeah, that I do know.
They have them in, like, cages and shit, like wooden cages.
I remember our old barber, he always tell us the stories about, I believe the only way to get rid of the duende is to offer them to somebody else who willingly wants them.
And then also it's said that
this devastating roller coaster tragedy will make you terrified to go to a theme park. This case is honestly like something out of my worst nightmares. It was the 19th of July 2013. 52-year-old Rosie Esparza was visiting the Six Flags amusement park in Texas. As she boarded the Texas Giant roller coaster, she was concerned. She called one of the attendants over and expressed worries that she felt like her safety harness wasn't on properly. However, the member of staff reassured her that the safety harness was on fine and she needn't worry. They said it was properly secured and the ride carried on. This would prove to be a fatal error. The roller coaster started and accelerated round a bend. Rosie's harness came loose just as she'd feared. She was thrown from the ride 75 feet onto a metal roof. She was almost severed in half in the horror incident. Police were obviously involved straight away and an investigation began. The ride was shut for about 2 months while they had to redesign the safety harnesses and the seatbelts. The victim's family sued Six Flags and the manufacturer of the roller coaster. They ended up reaching an agreement for an undisclosed amount.
Some people think that this is a case of vigilante justice. Jade Jenks is a 39-year-old interior designer who was just found guilty of murdering her stepdad after finding hundreds of nude photos of herself on his computer. On January 2nd, 2021, authorities found the body of Tom Merriman under a pile of garbage in Jade's Solana Beach, California driveway. According to Jade, on New Year's Eve, she'd been driving an extremely drunken Tom around when he fell asleep inside of her car. She stated that he was too heavy to move, so she let him sleep it off and went inside. The two lived right next door to each other, and Jade was basically Tom's caregiver. They even shared a driveway. When Jade returned the next day, she reportedly found him deceased in her car, and after panicking, she left his body under a pile of garbage in her driveway. Just a few days prior, Jade was cleaning Tom's house when she bumped into his computer. When it lit up, she noticed that a nude photo was set as a screensaver, but it wasn't just any nude photo, it was a photo of her. When she looked into it, she discovered hundreds of nude photos of herself on his computer, dating back to when she was just 16 years old. Jade was arrested after Tom's body was found, and after reportedly drugging him with sleeping pills and painkillers, eventually strangling him. During the trial, a series of texts from the day he died came to light. In one text to a male friend, Jade states, quote, "I just dosed the hell out of him," end quote. She later texted the same friend, quote, "It's pretty much done. I can't keep a kicking body in my truck. I'm about to club him on the head and he's waking up," end quote. She reportedly asked the male friend to help move his body out of the back seat of her vehicle. Also during the trial, it was reported that Tom was a known alcoholic who reportedly often mixed sleeping pills with alcohol. But despite that, Jade was convicted of first-degree murder. She'll be sentenced in April and faces up to life in prison.
When a doctor's decapitated head was discovered, police were horrified at the killer's identity. It was the 2nd of October 2022 in Westminster, Maryland. The wife of Dr. Magambe Pansuria was concerned. She phoned police to tell them there was absolutely no sign of her husband at home. There was, however, disturbing signs of a struggle. She told police there was blood all around the home. There was also a rug that had suspiciously gone missing from the laundry room. Police arrived at the property but wouldn't have to wait long until they heard devastating news. While officers scoured the property, dispatchers had another call. This time it was from a member of the public. The distressed caller was on Medford Road and reported a body lying at the side of the road. The body was dismembered and wrapped in a rug that matched the one that had gone missing from the house. Meanwhile, investigators found blood at the property in the garage and the bathroom. Blood was also found on the road nearby. Then, when the doctor's son, Ravi, came home, more shocking discoveries. He had come back in the family truck, which also contained blood and human tissue. Ravi himself was also found in clothing that had blood on it, and he was found in possession of a bloody hatchet. The blood was ultimately determined to be his father's. Just days later, investigators found his dad's head and hands in a creek. An autopsy confirmed that the victim had been stabbed 45 times. He suffered blunt force injuries to the head. Ravi was ultimately convicted of first-degree murder and was given life in prison without the possibility of parole. A motive for the crime is unknown. The victim was said to be a funny and generous man who loved gardening and had a real ability to connect with others.
This Las Vegas teacher allegedly body slammed a young child into a cot and then abused other kids at the school. This is 33-year-old Erica Westover. She is a daycare teacher, and she was body slamming these kids and slapping them around during nap time, of all times. Maybe don't work in a daycare if you have an issue with abusing children. Now, the child that got body slammed went and told their mother, thank God. The mother was quick to pull up, press charges, have the investigation launched immediately. And the assistants at the daycare actually recorded Erica Westover body slamming this kid. These assistants at the daycare were very quick to hand over the video to the mother and the police. They knew what she was doing was completely wrong. Then another story came out. Apparently one of the kids during playtime didn't want to get wet because, kids play with water all the time. So Westover behind me, she grabbed a hose, hosed the student down, and then when he fell, kicked a bunch of balls at him saying that's what you get. Many of the children also reported that they were begging their parents to not go to school. Obviously, they were going to get abused by this sick person here. She has been booked into the county jail, and she has been charged with child abuse and neglect. I don't even know why she's crying in her mugshot. She totally deserves to go to jail out of all the people. I guess that's what you get, Erica Westover. Let me know what you guys think about this story in the comment section below, and as always, these videos are for informational purposes only. Hope they lock her up.
This might be the most disturbing case in American history. This is Elizabeth Short, also known as Black Delilah. She was an American woman who was found murdered in a park in Los Angeles, California. Her case became highly publicized because of the gruesome nature of the crime, which included the mutilation of her corpse and her body being completely drained of blood. On the morning of January 15th, 1947, Elizabeth Short's naked body, severed in two pieces from the waist, was found in a vacant lot on the west side of South Norton Avenue in the neighborhood of Leimert Park. At the time, Leimert Park was largely undeveloped. Elizabeth Short's mutilated body was severed at the waist and drained of blood, leaving her skin extremely pale. Medical examiners determined that she had been dead for around 10 hours prior to the discovery, leaving her time of death either during the evening of January 14th or the early morning of January 15th. Her body was completely washed by the killer, and she had knife slits from the corner of her mouth all the way to her ears like the Joker. As I said before, her body was cut in two, and the lower half of her body was positioned a foot away from the upper, and her intestines had been tucked neatly beneath her buttocks. Her corpse had been posed with her hands over her head, her elbows bent at right angles, and her legs spread apart. The crazy thing is, they weren't able to find a single droplet of blood at the crime scene anywhere. Also, they came to the conclusion that she was completely alive and conscious when she was cut in half. Whatever you do, don't Google her name because you will see the picture of the crime scene, and it's absolutely disturbing and just unsettling. I saw this photo not too long ago for the first time in a while, and it stuck with me for a couple of days. This case is extremely inhumane, and let me know what you think about it.
This is a photo of Mike Tyson shaking hands with Dale Hausner, a known serial killer in Phoenix, Arizona who killed 8 people. Mike Tyson did not know that at the time. He thought he was a sports writer. Police then showed up to Mike's gym and let him know you just shook hands with a serial killer. Mike Tyson had literally no idea. The murders Hausner committed happened from May 2005 all the way up to August 2006. They were described as playing real-life Grand Theft Auto. They would shoot at random pedestrians just walking by and animals, and they would also just set random things on fire and burn it down. This man committed 80 felonies. I think there are only like 88 possible felonies you can get. This dude almost hit 100% completion on that. Now, this photo behind me was taken just a few days before Hausner was caught. Then when Mike Tyson was interviewed by the police about Hausner, he was like, yeah, seems like a nice guy, smaller stature, completely oblivious to the fact that he murdered 8 people. Super scary to think that people were just walking randomly in the street and getting shot by this guy right here. Glad that's over. Glad he's caught. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comment section below. And as always, these videos are for informational purposes only.
Germany supports pedophiles. At least that's what they're kind of saying with their recent move. So just yesterday, Germany changed one of their laws that said if someone was found in possession of CP images or videos or CSAM materials, they were to be sentenced to a minimum of a year in prison. But just recently, they changed that so that it's only 6 months minimum, which means that they have now taken the side of the offenders and not the abused. I mean, this is really, really disturbing. So the lawmakers themselves claimed that this law was too lenient, that mothers who were in mom group chats were being sent CP that someone discovered on their child's phone and then being sent to prison. And they also said that teachers were being sent to prison because they were sending CP they found on their students' phones to their parents. I mean, I kind of get it. That sucks if you're really not involved in something like that. You're trying to be a good person. But CP and CSAM is the darkest thing in the world. It's truly one of the biggest invisible problems in the world. And by saying they're reducing the sentence, I have a feeling this is going to embolden potential predators in Germany. And I think this little quip is particularly disturbing about the new legislation. So basically, because of this change, CP or CSAM possession sometimes can be a misdemeanor now and not a felony all the time, which means that it could be wiped from people's records. And here's a quote from somebody in the German government. They said that this change in rule is necessary to deal with the large proportion of young offenders with the necessary flexibility, given that those culprits tend to act out of inexperience, curiosity, thirst for adventure, or striving to impress, rather than out of sexual motives. So I don't really know how to respond to that other than WTF. They're basically saying that some of these pedophiles that are younger are doing this because they're inexperienced, they have curiosity, a thirst for adventure. That's why these people are downloading and disseminating CP or CSAM materials, according to this spokesperson. Please make it make sense. This is horrific and definitely I think, terrible change in the law.
You obviously know what Benadryl is, right? So back in like 2020, there was a where you have to take a certain amount, like a dozen or more, to hallucinate. I don't recommend anybody to like obviously go do it. I'm not saying to go do it, but I'm just saying like people that would hallucinate on Benadryl, it would be bad trips overall. Like they would see spiders, they would see snakes, wasps attacking them. They would hear like familiar voices and unfamiliar voices talking to them, and they would see shadowy figures, and they will also see the Hat Man. Have you ever heard about the Hat Man?
The Hat Man, no.
It's a sleep paralysis demon. So people around the world has seen this motherfucker for like years, bro. Websites dedicated to this, like people talking about their stories, stuff like that. Everybody would describe him the same way too, like a tall 6 to 8 foot person.
Bro, 6 to 8 foot.
He wears a fedora. You can't really see his face, only like 2 red eyes, and it's always like he's a shadowy figure.
And I remember a supporter actually talking about how they had sleep paralysis and they saw saw a man with a hat outside of the window, bro. And keep in mind the window is like mad fucking tall.
So I do remember seeing a story about a therapist who had like a patient, and he would always say that he would.
This Loki made me even more scared because he was just talking about like a shadow person holding up the fucking curtain.
Hi, I'm Mrs. Hare. I'm in charge of FCCLA, and today we're running the blood drive. I do the blood drive because we are donating blood to save lives, and my FCCLA students get scholarships.
33-year-old high school teacher Heather Hare was recently sentenced to 13 years in federal prison. So Heather actually went viral a few years ago for something that happened with her students. Here's a news article right here. Her kids in her class made her a YouTube video. Basically, in this YouTube video, the kids said they missed her, and she responded. This whole thing went mega viral. Heather was actually on the show Good Morning America, and in this article, eerily, they say Mrs. Hare touched a lot of her students' hearts, but yeah. It came out later, though, that Heather had sexually assaulted one of her high school students 20 to 30 times in the 2021 to 2022 school year. According to prosecutors, Heather met the victim on the first day of his senior school year. She then offered to give him one-on-one counseling sessions. She then gave him her personal phone number and began incessantly messaging this minor on all social media platforms. Keep in mind, throughout this whole time, Heather, the 33-year-old teacher, was married. And this entire time behind her husband's back, she was messaging minors the most graphic, disturbing stuff you can possibly imagine. And I can already smell the comments coming now. Oh, I'm jealous. Oh, I wish that was me. I don't see anything wrong with that. And frankly, I find it extremely disturbing that when I cover stories of female pedophiles and predators, I get comments like that on my posts. That's just unacceptable. This is a woman who went out of her way behind her husband's back to target children. And not only that, she sexually assaulted children. And by making stupid comments like that, you minimize the gravity of a crime like this. This woman abused her position of power in a child's life to make that child a victim. It's absolutely unacceptable. It's disgusting. And I hope she enjoys all 13 years, every second that she spends in that cell. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife, Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms.
When a man was put in prison for killing his mum, his family should have been safe. Then another member of the family was brutally murdered, but this time by someone else. Just a warning here, this case is absolutely sickening. In 2013, the dismembered body of Tanya Bird was discovered in suitcases in the Bronx. Now, if you haven't already watched my first video on this case, I advise you to go back, watch that video, and then come back to this one. Tanya's son, Basid, was pictured here holding her dismembered head. He was later convicted of her murder and jailed for 25 years to life. However, that was far from the end of the tragedies of this family. While Basid was in prison, another family member was about to be murdered again, but by another family member. Now, as I said in my previous video about this, convicted murderer Basid had a son when he went to jail. This was Zamir Coombs. He was a sweet little boy, aged just 4 in 2017. While his dad was in prison for killing his own mother, Zamir was in custody of his mum, 28-year-old Zara Coombs. She was dating somebody else at this point. She was no longer with Basid. In January 2017, Zara was at home with her little boy when he asked for something to eat. She refused to give him any food, so he took matters into his own hands and went over to the fridge to grab an egg. He then accidentally dropped the egg on the floor. She reportedly became so enraged that she beat him to death with a broomstick. The little boy didn't stand a chance. She then callously put his body in a storage container and carried on with her daily chores, like feeding her little baby. When Zara's boyfriend returned about 20 minutes later, he found the absolutely horrifying scene. He was confronted by the realization that his girlfriend had just murdered her own child. He rang police, they raced to the scene and rushed the little boy to hospital, but it was tragically too late. Shockingly, she was only given 17 years in prison after pleading guilty to manslaughter.
Carlisle cop committed one of the worst crimes I've recently read about. This is 28-year-old Stephen Kyle Cugini. Stephen previously served with the United States Army, and afterwards he became a police officer in Pennsylvania. So on Monday, April 15th, 2024, after the 13-month-old baby that he was caring for was dropped off at daycare, the employees there noticed that the baby was badly injured and they reported it to authorities. I'm just going to read this to you. The baby was taken to the hospital then for her broken tibia, fibula, bruising on her face, ears, left foot, ankle, butt, and genitals. And the doctor noted, quote, significant injuries to the genitals. But this was complicated. You see, at first the 13-month-old baby's mother tried to cover for her boyfriend. She claimed that the family's dog had caused the injuries and this was nothing more than diaper rash. However, she would soon make a disturbing admission. On Saturday, April 13th, this woman had let Stephen give her 13-month-old baby girl a bath. Apparently, Stephen told her that he had locked the bathroom door to keep her 5-year-old son out, but soon the mother heard her daughter, quote, cry very loudly and, quote, repeated pounding. She then went and knocked on the door and it took 10 seconds for Stephen to open up. And when he did open the door, she noticed that his shirt was soaking wet. So, based on the injuries, authorities then arrested Stephen Kyle Cugini, but he immediately tried to claim that all this is a misunderstanding. This was just diaper rash. He said that he had seen the same diaper rash in his 2 own twin daughters. That's right, to add insult to injury in this terrible situation, Stephen actually had 2 kids of his own. This is his LinkedIn profile. You can even see down here, he says, I am also a father of twin daughters. I don't even want to know what happened there. Thankfully, though, Stephen has been arrested and he's expected to face charges for all of this. But it always blows my mind how respectable people like Stephen, a guy who was in the United States Army, a guy who took an oath to protect and serve people of this nation, how someone like that can do such a depraved, disgusting, disturbing thing. And if you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms. Actor Steven Seagal is supposedly one of the biggest creeps in Hollywood history. Let's take a look at some of the disturbing allegations that have been made about him over the years. So Steven Seagal really does everything. He's a musician, he's a black belt, he used to run a dojo, he's an actor, and at one point he even became a sheriff's deputy in Arizona. Yes, that happened in real life. Steven Seagal was a A-list actor in the 80s and 90s. He was all over Hollywood. But all these allegations really began in the early 1990s. So in May of 1991, 3 women come forward and accuse Steven Seagal of sexual harassment. Then at around the same time, 4 more women come forward and state that Steven Seagal acted creepily towards them and made sexual advances during late-night casting sessions. In 1995, another lawsuit was filed against Steven Seagal for discrimination and harassment, but this lawsuit was dismissed ultimately. Then, in 2010, over a decade later, more disturbing charges came forward. This time, a lawsuit was filed in Los Angeles accusing Steven Seagal of sexual harassment, wrongful termination for a job, and basically participating in human sex trafficking. Steven, of course, denied these allegations, and eventually they were mysteriously dropped, with nothing further coming out about them. Then, in 2017, things got really bad for Steven. First, Ellen DeGeneres' wife, Portia de Rossi, came forward and stated that Steven Seagal had sexually harassed her during an audition. Then, during an appearance on Jimmy Kimmel Live, actress Katherine Heigl stated that she too had been sexually harassed by Steven. She even stated that Steven had claimed he had a 16-year-old girlfriend back when he was harassing her. And later that year, a model came forward on Instagram and stated that Steven Seagal had sexually assaulted her years ago. Then in 2018, an actress named Rachel Grant came forward and said that in the year 2002, Steven Seagal had, yes, sexually. So yeah, over the years, Steven Seagal has been accused of doing a number of horrific things. There's also the way that he's treated people that worked on his movies, altercations he's gotten into, legal decisions that were made against him by the government, fraud, all of that. It's a crazy story, but yeah, I think he's definitely guilty of doing a number of these things, and it's crazy that he never faced any sort of legal ramifications.
This might be the most disturbing young killer ever, and this case is just gut-turning. In 2011, Daniel Bartlam, who was 14 years old at the time, ran out of his burning house with his younger brother and dog, and they waited for the emergency services to arrive. When the police questioned Daniel, he told them that someone had broken into the house and harmed his mother and then set the house on fire. But after this initial statement, Daniel told the police the very disturbing and sickening truth. He said that he crept into his mother's room at night with a claw hammer in his hand. He then stood over his own mother while she slept, and as he looked down on her, he raised a hammer and hit her in the head 7 times. And after he was done, he poured gasoline around her bedroom and then set the whole room on fire. The disturbing thing is, Daniel's mother was only identified through her dental records, meaning her body was completely burnt beyond recognition. And as the police searched the house, they found the hammer used in the attack in Daniel's bedroom. And they also found a document on his computer where he written a story featuring a character with his name who murdered his mother. Another disturbing part about this case was that a popular TV show in the UK called Coronation Street had recently showed a story where one of the characters murdered a woman with a hammer. And the storyline in this show resembled a striking resemblance of what Daniel had done. The police also found TV clips of the scene from the episode of Coronation Street along with other violent scenes from popular films on Daniel's computer. The media then gave Daniel the nickname the Coronation Street Killer. Daniel's stepfather had also spoken about Daniel's behavior before the awful incident took place, and he said that Daniel had plastic boxes full of Star Wars and Doctor Who figures, and Daniel would just urinate in those boxes. Daniel also defecated all over his bedroom. And what's strange is that Daniel was raised by his mother in a very stable home, and by all accounts, Daniel was a normal young boy. The family had moved to a different area in 2009, and that's the year he began to become more reclusive, spending most of his time in his bedroom playing video games and watching horror films. His stepfather blamed the video games and the horror films on why Daniel murdered, but I don't believe that. Daniel said that he killed his mother because of an argument that they had when she called him a freak. But with no evidence of abuse in the home, the motive is still unclear. Daniel was then found guilty of the murder of his mother. This whole case is just so sad, especially because everyone that knew Daniel's mother said that she lived for her children and was a warm, loving mother. And for someone to do this to their own mother is just absolutely sickening.
Bill Clinton allegedly sexually assaulted this woman in 1978, so let's talk about it. This is Juanita Broderick. She is a big critic, a very outspoken woman who has stood up against Bill Clinton, and she has a very, very disturbing story to share. In fact, she has written an entire book about this encounter titled, "You'd Better Put Some Ice on That, How I Survived Being Raped by Bill Clinton." So in the year 1974, Juanita bought a nursing home. She had gone to nursing school and she wanted to operate her own nursing home. And it was in the year 1978 when Bill Clinton visited her nursing home for his 1978 gubernatorial campaign. So according to Juanita, she stated that she wanted to volunteer for the campaign. She got contact information from Bill Clinton, who was the Attorney General at the time, and she was then invited to visit the campaign office in Little Rock, Arkansas. She contacted the campaign office again a few weeks later when she was in Little Rock, and allegedly they told her that he wasn't in the office that day, but Bill Clinton could meet her at a coffee shop. According to Juanita, though, when Bill met her at the coffee shop, he stated that they should have coffee in her room instead of the lobby to avoid crowds of reporters and people. And she agreed, and they went up to her room. And it was apparently in this hotel room where this disturbing act unfolded. So according to Juanita, she and Bill talked for a little bit. He mentioned how he wanted to renovate a prison that they could see from the hotel room window, and then the unspeakable happened. According to Juanita, Bill tried to come kiss her, and she expressly stated that she wasn't interested because she was married, but Bill was unrelenting. Allegedly, she begged him to stop, but he pressed on. He kissed her and started biting her lip, shoved her onto the bed, and just kept biting on her lower lip as hard as he could. And when everything was said and done, he got up, straightened himself up. She was crying on the bed, and then he looked at her and said, "You better get some ice on that," before walking out the door. Now, you could easily just say that Juanita was making all of this up, but at the time she was actually sharing her hotel room with her friend and fellow employee named Norma Rogers. When Norma returned to the hotel room, she stated that she found Juanita in a state of shock. Her pantyhose was ripped at the crotch, and her lip was swollen as if she had been hit or bitten. She also stated that Juanita immediately told her about what happened. So at the end of the day, this allegation was never actually fully proven to have really happened, but this is not the only allegation that has ever been made about Bill Clinton. And I'm not even talking about all the Epstein stuff that's coming out right now. But if you want me to talk more about this stuff, let me know and I'll make a part 2 in this series.
This guy is one of the most awful serial killers there has ever been, and I feel like he's never talked about. In my opinion, this guy's worse than Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, Hi Meg, I talk about true crime. Let's get into the story of the Butcher, the worst serial killer Canada has ever seen. Robert Pickton was born October 24th, 1949, in British Columbia, Canada. Robert had quite a bad upbringing. His dad was very abusive. He actually grew up on a pig farm. From a really young age, him and his brother had to work countless hours on this pig farm, and then they were forced to go straight to school without taking a shower or anything. Because he was showing up to school unwashed, Robert started getting bullied, and they gave him the nickname Stinky Piggy. As Robert grew older, he was said to be very quiet, but he apparently sometimes had these weird bursts of bizarre behavior. These bursts would come out of nowhere, and he would just start acting really strange. In 1996, Robert's brother opened up a kind of charity thing. The charity was started to try to make more money for their pig farm. It was called the Piggy Palace Good Times Society. And what they would do is they would hold huge parties and raves to try and raise money. And I'm not joking when I say huge parties and raves. 17,000 people were said to have shown up at one point. 17,000 people at once. Sex workers and biker gangs would join these parties as well, but for Robert, it all started going downhill in 1997, when he attempted to murder a girl. I don't usually do this in these videos, but a lot of you ask what blush I use, and this is the blush I use. It's usually £10 on the TikTok shop, but it's on for $5 right now. So if you click right here, you can get it. I just ordered kind of a peachy version of this. I'm not being paid to talk about this. I just saw they were on offer and you guys ask about these all the time. So get your hands on them for cheap while you can. So Robert attempts to murder a woman for the first time that we know of. According to her statement, he attempted to handcuff her and then he started stabbing her multiple times before she managed to get away. This should have been the thing that got him on police radar, but he was able to get the charges dropped, because the woman he attacked was on a lot of drugs at the time, and Robert used that to come up with a story. He told police, like, she was hitchhiking, I was just trying to help her, and she attacked me. And they believed him because she was on drugs. And unfortunately, for the next 60 women he would kill, he was let go. And he was able to come up with a strategy that wouldn't get him caught next time. He developed a plan and started killing a bunch of women. And Robert was really, really good at staying under the radar. Now, what did he do exactly? Let me tell you. Because it's disturbing. First of all, he always went for hitchhikers, addicts, or prostitutes. And what he would do is he would promise them money, drugs, accommodation, anything to get them back to his farm. Once he got them back, he would then shoot or strangle them to death. And this next part is why he was given the name the Butcher. He would take the victims' bodies, chop them up, and feed them to his pigs. Now, if you're not aware of this already, pigs will literally eat anything. Everything. So the evidence was just, bye. They were getting rid of the evidence for him. All of a sudden, there is an increase in missing women in the area. But sadly, because he only went after sex workers or addicts or hitchhikers, no one cared. And this always makes me so mad with cases like these. Like, they're still human beings, but no bodies were showing up, so there was no crime, no body, no crime. But as the numbers started rising, people were kind of getting a bit worried. A group of people that weren't the police actually got a list together of all of the names of these young women who were missing. They brought that to the police and were like, do you see now? And that's when the investigation actually began into finding out what happened to these girls. And all of these girls had one person in common: Robert Pickton. He was the only person whose name continuously came up when they were looking for these girls. Police needed a way to get onto the farm with a warrant without him knowing about it and hiding all the evidence first. And so they heard that he had possession of an illegal firearm. And so they used that as the cover-up to get onto his property. On the property, they found multiple items that belonged to these missing women, along with some blood-stained clothing and tiny bone fragments. Now, things aren't looking too good for Robert, but because the pigs had eaten all the evidence, basically all of it, they were only able to charge him with the murder of 6 women. And so he got 6 counts of murder. When he got arrested, he actually said that he killed 49 women and that he was sad that he didn't get to round up to 50. What the hell, Robert? What does he want the police officer to say, like, oh, I feel so bad for you? No! He was arrested in 2002, and this trial was huge. Of course, he was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. But guys, that's not the worst part of this story, because I'm getting to that now. One element of the story that I kept out until now is that Robert sold the meat of his pigs to people who lived around the area. These pigs, who ate the remains of 60 women, were sold to his neighbors. When I say neighbors, I just mean people who live in the area. So like secondhand cannibalism. I could never eat pig again if that was me. So yeah, they were pretty disturbed and freaked out by this information, which is totally understandable and just totally disgusting. After a huge search of his property, police now believe that the number of women Robert killed was in the 60s. 60 women. 60 mother, daughters, wives. It's insane. It really annoys me with cases like these. I know it was like in 2002 and things have changed, but have they? I find that a lot of cases like these that I cover always start with, oh, all these women were going missing, but they were sex workers, but they were drug addicts, who cares? And it's like, it's insane to me that like they're not seen as equals to any other woman walking on the street, but whatever. Hopefully that changes. And for those wondering, I have actually covered this story before, but the quality of the video was so bad that I couldn't keep it up anymore. Like, it really bothered me to watch back, so I thought I would remake it in a higher quality way. I hope you guys enjoyed it regardless, and have a wonderful day. My heart goes out to every single one of the victims, their families, and people who cared about them, and I hope Robert rots in jail. Anyways, this is not a good representation of Canadians. We're actually really nice people. I'll see you all in the next video. Love you guys. Bye.
Sometimes true for stranger than fiction. The case of Richard Trenton Chase is a story which even the most depraved horror writer would struggle to create. Over the course of 4 weeks spanning across 1977 and 1978, Richard Chase took the lives of 6 innocent victims in Sacramento, California. His murders gradually progressed in violence, beginning with drive-by shootings and culminating in acts of cannibalism.
If you ever wonder why women choose the bear, it's because of stories like this. This is Amber Gibson. She was 16 years old when she was sexually assaulted and murdered by her own brother Connor. They both lived in foster homes since the ages of 3 and 5. But at the time of her murder, Amber was still living in a children's home while Connor was living in a hostel. Her horrible story begins in June of 2021 when she was sexually assaulted while asleep by 20-year-old Jamie Stars. Jamie was a complete stranger to her, but while Amber was at a party, she woke up naked from the waist down in a bed with Jamie under the covers. Just 5 months later, Amber made plans to hang out with her brother Connor on November 26, 2021, and she was really excited to see him and hang out with him since they no longer lived together. She was so excited that she even posted a selfie with him online. The two were caught on security footage going to Cadzo Glen Park in Hamilton, but roughly 90 minutes later, Connor was seen leaving the park alone. While he was there, he forcibly took off all of Amber's clothes and sexually assaulted her. During the assault, he hit her over the head several times, causing severe blunt force trauma. He then strangled her to death and hid her body in bushes and branches, returning home like nothing happened. Connor was then caught on security footage carrying a plastic bin to a dumpster behind his hostel and throwing away the items inside. Those items turned out to be his shorts and shirt, which were covered in Amber's blood. Obviously, when Amber didn't return home that night, she was reported missing, but her body wouldn't be found for another 2 days. In that time, Connor called the children's home where she was staying and pretended that she was still alive, and he even posted a tribute for her on Facebook. When her body was found, her clothes were also found nearby, and Connor's DNA was found on her shorts. Because of this, Connor was quickly arrested, although he initially denied any involvement. But this story gets worse. Before Amber's body was found, 45-year-old Stephen Corrigan, who was a complete stranger to her and and Connor found her body in the park, but instead of calling the police like a normal person, he instead sexually assaulted Amber's dead body and then tried hiding it further in the bushes. So in a matter of months, Amber was assaulted by 3 different men and eventually murdered at the hands of her own brother, someone she trusted. Last summer, Connor was sentenced to life in prison for the assault and murder of his sister, but he'll be eligible for parole after 22 years. Jamie Stars, the man who sexually assaulted Amber just 5 months before her murder, was sentenced to 10.5 years. He was also convicted of sexually assaulting another teenage girl just 1 month before Amber. Although he's technically considered a high risk of assaulting again, his sentence was so low because, according to authorities, he showed cognitive and emotional immaturity. He was reportedly taken from his home at the age of 3 and by 9 already had addiction issues. So because of his chaotic lifestyle and his young age at the time of the crime, authorities believe he has a better chance at rehabilitation, thus the short sentence. As for Stephen Corrigan, the man who found Amber deceased and decided to sexually assault her body instead of calling the police, he was sentenced to just 9 years in prison. Amber lived a very short and very tragic life. Everyone in her life let Amber down, and it's exactly stories like this that prove why women would rather choose the bear.
The morning of November 29th, Christine Young suddenly woke up out of a deep sleep feeling a cold sensation come over her. It was exactly 5:45 a.m. and she noticed that her arms and legs were starting to go numb. She thought it was strange but brushed it off in the moment, not knowing what it could have meant. After all, she needed to get some sleep so she could wake up to meet with her daughter later in the morning like they had planned for a while now. But when Christine's daughter Ashley didn't show up for their arranged meeting, she began to worry. She started frantically calling Ashley's phone but got no response. So she called each one of Ashley's friends to see if they had any idea where she was. This is when she learned that her daughter Ashley had plans to meet up with 30-year-old Jared Chance and hadn't been seen since leaving a local bar with him. A few days later, police receive a disturbing phone call from a concerned neighbor in Grand Rapids, Michigan. This neighbor explains that he's just stumbled upon a tarp with a stream of blood leaking from it. When police arrive, they find that the tarp is wrapped around a human torso. The owner of that apartment? Jared Chance. The DNA of the torso is tested and it comes back that it is human and that it does belong to Ashley Young. Ashley's arms and legs were later found in a box in Jared's apartment. That's when Ashley's mom, Christine, recalls the incident from a few days prior. She believes that at the time she woke up at exactly 5:45 in the morning was the time of her daughter Ashley's death. Unfortunately, Ashley's head has still never been located.
These are people who killed their families reacting to their prison sentences. Up first is Alex Murdo, who murdered his wife Maggie and their 22-year-old son Paul on June 7, 2021. Alex called Maggie on June 7, 2021 and asked her to meet him at the Murdo family lodge. He wanted the two of them to travel together from there to see his father, Randolph Murdo, who was actually terminally ill. Maggie texted a friend saying Alex sounded fishy and was up to something. After parking her car at the house, she walked to the dog's kennel where she found her son Paul. Alex Murdo then called the police from his cell phone at 10:06 p.m. saying he had discovered the bodies of his wife Maggie and their younger son Paul near the dog kennels at the family's hunting lodge. Each had been shot multiple times in the head, wrists, and chest with different guns. Alex Murdo claimed that at the time of the killings he had been with his mother, who has dementia. However, cell phone data, including videos containing Alex's voice, placed him at the scene before their deaths. In October 2021, it was revealed that the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division had regarded Alex as a person of interest in the homicide since the start of the investigation. The investigation was heavily criticized by Murdo's defense attorney during the entire trial, and the crime scene was spoiled by rain. The police reportedly failed to collect various evidences and allowed family members and friends to walk through the scene. Alex Murdo was then arrested in July 2022 after the Colleton County Grand Jury issued an indictment charging him with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime in the deaths of his wife Maggie and their son Paul. The indictment stated that Alex shot his wife with a rifle and his son with a shotgun. Alex Murdo pleaded not guilty, and prosecutors said that they would seek life in prison without the possibility of parole and not the death penalty. And what I'm about to show you right now is Alex Murdo's reaction to getting that exact sentencing.
And I tell you again, I respect this court, but I'm innocent. I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my wife Maggie, and I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my son, Pawpaw.
Well, and it might not have been you. It might have been the monster you become when you take 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 opioid pills. Maybe you become another person. All right, Mr. Murdaugh, I sentence you for a term of the rest of your natural life. And officers may carry forth on the imposition.
This is a selfie of a man posing with a decapitated head. This murder case is absolutely horrific. It was February 2013 on what should have been a normal day in New York for James Daniels. He was on a dog walk in the Bronx. His dog was strangely drawn to a suitcase on the pavement. The dog wouldn't stop barking and trying to get into the bag. When James took a closer look, he was horrified. Inside the bag was a severed head. He ran round the corner and called police. When investigators arrived and looked into the bags, they found multiple body parts. There was an arm, a leg, a head, and portions of a torso. They noticed that the suitcase smelled very potent. It was the unmistakable scent of cleaning products. Later that day, dispatchers received another 911 call. This time, it was from 23-year-old Bassett McLean. He was reporting his mum missing, 45-year-old Tanya Bird. Now, obviously, the police department knew that they'd already found a deceased woman. Officers went round to Bassett's house and they noticed that strangely it smelt the exact same as that suitcase. Officers asked the man to give them a photo of his missing mother. When he handed his phone over, investigators got a lot more than they bargained for. On the device were extremely graphic photos such as this one where he's posing with his mum's decapitated head. Bassett was arrested and charged with his mother's murder. Now, shockingly, Bassett was actually the dad to a 3-month-old little boy. What would happen to his son later is absolutely unthinkable, but we'll get to that. Meanwhile, Tanya's remains were sent off for an autopsy. They confirmed that she had died after being stabbed. Now, loved ones stated that Bassett had disliked his mother for some time. They also said that his behaviour was often violent. He would set fire to things, and he was also known to have stabbed a police officer. During Bassett's police interview, he claimed that someone else had killed his mum. He blamed his friend, 26-year-old William Harris. He said he had threatened to kill both him and his younger 7-year-old brother if he didn't help to dismember the body. He said he was forced to dismember her in the bath. Now, William was also brought in for questioning but had a very different story. He stated that it was Bassett who had actually killed his mum, and then he'd bragged to William and showed him this horrible photo on his phone. William was charged with unlawfully dissecting a human body and hindering prosecution. Bassett continuously changed his story. At first he protested his innocence, and then he stated to officers, if you can kill somebody, you should be able to cut them up too. If you can't do that, if you can't have the stomach to cut them up, then you're a coward. In court, prosecutors argued that Bassett had stabbed his mum to death after she told him to move out. He was found guilty and given 25 years to life in prison. He was taken to Rikers Island, and en route there, he punched a prison officer and slashed his face. But the horrific story of this family does not end there. As I mentioned earlier, Bassett was a father at the time to a 3-month-old little boy. After he was imprisoned, his family was involved in yet another shocking murder case. This time, someone else was to blame. I will post that case straight after this one.
These are murders everybody should know about, and this one is absolutely gut-turning. In 2007, the boy on the left named Gabriel Kuhn, who was 12 years old, was killed by a 16-year-old boy named Daniel Petrie, who was on the right. Daniel and Gabriel became good friends and began playing an online game called Tibia. And one point in the game, Gabriel asked Daniel for 20,000 virtual cash to clear the stage. Gabriel borrowed money from Daniel to use in the game, but refused to pay him back. Gabriel then blocked Daniel on everything, and this made Daniel absolutely furious. And he went to Gabriel's house to pay him a visit. A couple of days before the murder, Daniel called the home phone at Gabriel's house and his mother picked up. She explained that she would be out of town and that her son would be home alone if they wanted to play, completely unaware of the boys falling out. And on August 23, 2007, Daniel went to Gabriel's house and knocked on the door. Nobody answered and Daniel kept knocking, but eventually Gabriel started speaking to Daniel through the door. Daniel told Gabriel to unlock the door and let him in, and if he apologized to him, everything would be fine. Believing this, Gabriel unlocked the door and let Daniel in. And after entering the house, Daniel locked the door behind him and Daniel brutally assaulted Gabriel. Gabriel tried his best to defend himself, but he failed to do so. Daniel was older, bigger, and stronger. Gabriel was dripping in blood after being brutally beaten by Daniel. Daniel then laughed at the terrified Gabriel and took him to the bedroom, where he then sexually assaulted him. Gabriel cried, but this made Daniel even more cruel. After all of this, Gabriel threatened Daniel, saying he would tell his mother everything that happened, but this only made Daniel even more mad. And in a fit of rage, Daniel took a cord from a gaming console and wrapped it around Gabriel's neck and strangled him with it until his body went limp. Daniel assumed Gabriel was dead, and believing this, Daniel tried to move and hide the body in the crawl space leading to the bedrooms. However, the body was way too heavy, and after realizing this, Daniel searched the house for sharp tools, and he eventually found a kitchen knife and a hacksaw. Daniel then returned to Gabriel's body, and in order to make it lighter, he took the knife and hacksaw and began cutting at the top of Gabriel's leg to remove it. And as Daniel cut into Gabriel's leg, he woke up. Gabriel wasn't dead. He let out a blood-curdling scream, but Daniel restrained him, making sure to twist and turn the blade to make it even more painful. Eventually, Daniel dismembered his right leg and moved to his left. And after severing both of his legs, Gabriel sadly passed away. His autopsy suggested that he was still alive throughout the whole ordeal, and he eventually died from shock and blood loss. After Daniel finished the dismemberment, he tried to hide the body again, and he wrapped a cable and wire around Gabriel's body. But the body was still too heavy, and Daniel fled the scene. Gabriel's body was discovered by his brother, and the body was left next to the hallway door as well as the legs and hacksaw. Daniel Petrie was admitted to a juvenile center in September 2007 to only 3 years. This is due to Brazil's laws of sentencing minors. And to make you realize how evil Daniel actually was, when the judge asked him if he had any final words of remorse, Daniel said this: "Gabriel was a coward and a thief. He burns in hell right now where I sent him. And when I die, I will find him in hell and finish my revenge." It's also worth saying that the photos of the crime scene and Gabriel's body have surfaced on the internet, and nobody knows for sure how they got there. I highly recommend not to look at them due to the graphic nature of them, as well as they will be some of the worst crime scene photos you will ever see. It's honestly insane how Daniel is walking free today, and may Gabriel rest in peace. This case is just awful.
This teenager was brutally murdered, and the killers got away with it for years until a shocking robbery exposed the truth. Shafila Ahmed was a British-Pakistani 17-year-old girl from Bradford. It was 2003 and she had a bright future ahead of her. Shafila was living in Warrington, Cheshire, and had dreams of becoming a solicitor. Unfortunately, her future was stolen away from her when she was brutally murdered. She'd had a traumatic childhood and suffered relentless physical and emotional abuse at the hands of her parents. Every single day she was practically used as a punch bag by her mum and dad, and even her basic needs weren't being met. She was frequently locked in a room without food and water, and she had physical injuries all over her body. It was reported a teacher at school even noticed this on one occasion when they saw that she had bite marks on her cheeks. Heartbreakingly, nothing was done, and when she turned 15, she applied to be fostered. Her application stated that the reason she wanted to leave home was, "One parent hold me whilst the other hit me." Now, Shafila had been so distressed by the abuse that she'd endured that on one occasion she even drank bleach. This was obviously an attempt on her life, and although she didn't succeed, she caused severe internal damage. She was having to take medication for this until she vanished. On September the 11th, 2003, her teachers rang police. They told them Shafila was missing. Now, by this point, she'd already been gone an entire week. A huge search began for the missing teen. There were televised appeals for the girl, and locals joined in with the hunt. However, police started to fear that she'd been killed in a so-called honour killing. Theories started to develop about Shafila and whether she had potentially been killed because she refused an arranged marriage. Her family were questioned, and her parents said that although an arranged marriage was on the cards, they weren't forcing her into anything. Then, in February 2004, a horrific discovery was made. The teenager's dismembered body parts were discovered in the River Kent. Now, due to the condition of the remains, it was too hard to determine a cause of death. Police conducted a search of Shafilia's family home and found a heartbreaking poem. It was written by Shafilia and described how trapped she felt. A friend of the teenager also came forward to state that she felt concerned with how Shafilia's mum spoke to her and treated her. Despite this, several members of the family were arrested and questioned, but later released without charge, frustratingly. Years ticked on, and it seemed like no one was going to be held accountable for her murder. That was until 2010, when an armed robbery took place on the 25th of August. Shafilia's younger sister Alicia had arranged an armed robbery at her parents' house. Alicia herself, her brother, sisters, and parents were all in the house when this took place. 3 masked men with guns and hammers tied all of the members of the family up. They ransacked the house and left with money and valuables. When Alicia was eventually arrested for her part in orchestrating the robbery, what she told police was shocking. She admitted to police to having seen her parents kill her sister. She said they had tried to force her into an arranged marriage and she was resisting, so they suffocated her. Both parents were put on trial in 2012. They were found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years. Alicia was given a suspended sentence for her part in the robbery and was placed in the Witness Protection Program.
John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, did not act alone. This TikTok series is about to blow your mind, but there's a lot of information here, so proceed with caution. The case of John Wayne Gacy, the serial killer clown, is one of the most infamous true crime stories in American history. A brief overview of the case: in the 1970s, John Wayne Gacy murdered 33 young men. He buried them in the crawl space beneath his home and his yard, and he was connected to a number of different crimes. Gacy himself gained infamy because he dressed up as Pogo the Clown on the weekends and volunteered at hospitals and children's birthday parties. Now, the official story says that John Wayne Gacy acted completely alone. He had no help in carrying out any of these murders, but I really don't believe that that's the case. Through all of our research that we did for our podcast, we've determined that Gacy was connected to a number of other killers, pedophiles across America. And he even may have been connected to one of America's other most infamous serial killers, the Candyman out of Houston, Texas. So before we get into this, I want to state that I do believe that Gacy did murder some people, and I think he was very complicit in all of this, obviously, but I don't think that he acted alone. But why do I think that? So to start off, we need to talk about Jeffrey Rignall, this guy who was actually a survivor of John Wayne Gacy. After a night of abuse and essay at the hands of John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Rignall was allowed to go free. But what Jeffrey would go on to tell authorities and the media about what happened that night at Gacy's home is a major thing in this whole conspiracy. Now, Jeffrey would tell the police that while Gacy was essaying him, there was another man in the room. Now, whether or not this other man participated in the essaying or they were there to watch, it doesn't matter. Someone was watching this criminal act occur. He knew he could give a description of the guy, and he knew that someone else was there watching this happen. Then we get to Robert Bob Gilroy, who was a victim of John Wayne Gacy. So Robert Gilroy was abducted on September 15th, 1977. That's the official date that he went missing. He was supposed to show up for an event after that day, but he never showed. But John Wayne Gacy's plane tickets and records placed him as being out of the state at the time. His plane tickets from the time show that Gacy left Illinois on September 12th, and he didn't return until September 16th, the day after Robert Gilroy went missing. Already, these two facts point to a larger conspiracy at hand. There may have been people helping procure victims for Gacy, and he may have been even paying for these victims. And that's when we get to Philip Paskey and John David Norman, two of the most horrific people I've ever read about, and this is where the connections with the case start to get really shocking. And we've talked about John David Norman here on my TikTok before. This guy was connected with the higher-ups in the government. This guy had lots of political power, and he was a known pedophile. Remember, in earlier TikToks, I even told you about how John David Norman was arrested multiple times. He had Rolodexes full of index cards of the people who he was supplying these young men to. And both times, the police departments lost the Rolodexes and lost all the names of the abusers. But how did they connect to Gacy? Well, in part 2, we're going to talk about it.
If I didn't know this was a true crime case, I would think it was a disturbing horror film. On the morning of the 7th of October 2022, a barefoot woman was running around Excelsior Springs, Missouri, bashing on people's doors. Witnesses describe her looking like she came straight from a horror film and she was calling for help. She'd been beaten, held captive, and SA'd for weeks. The woman was a shocking sight. She was covered in injuries and was wearing a bin bag. Disturbingly, she was gasping for breath as she had a very tight metal collar locked around her neck. It was a nurse who opened the door to her and let her come in.
The nurse started to call police, and at this point the woman panicked. She warned her that the captor would kill her and claimed that he had killed her 2 friends. When police got there, the woman explained that a man called Timothy had captured her the month prior. He'd been holding her hostage this whole time. She said he'd been keeping her locked in the basement and had been SAing her. Disturbingly, she told police that he actually had a young son who lived at the house with him. When Timothy had taken his young son to school the one day, she used it as her opportunity to escape. Police made their way to the home of 39-year-old Timothy Haslett Jr. and found the property did in fact have a basement like the woman described. Timothy was arrested and is facing 9 charges, including first-degree kidnapping. He's being held on a $3 million bond and faces 5 life sentences. Before his arrest, police were actually called to his address 3 times. Twice they were asked to do welfare checks, and this was from an employer and also family members. Police have searched his home with cadaver dogs and they haven't yet released what they know.